All right, welcome to another deep dive. We are going to be talking about LGBT voters in the 2024 election.
Okay.
And we have this really fascinating article from the Raleigh News and Observer that really digs into this topic.
Yeah.
It's raising a lot of questions, especially as Trump made games with some demographics. The LGBT vote really swung the other way.
Yeah, it's really interesting considering like the whole political landscape and how everything else was going.
Yeah, so the article cites exit polls that show Harris won 86% of the LGBT vote.
Oh, wow.
Which is huge. I mean, it's practically unheard of.
It is. It's a dramatic shift, especially when you consider that Trump had 27% support from this group in 2020 and only 14% in 2016.
Right. So what's behind this huge change? I mean, that's a massive jump.
Well, the article highlights some analysis from Professor Allison Gash, and she suggests there are a couple of key factors at play here. First, she points to the increasingly visible anti-trans agenda within the GOP.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's like picking teams for dodgeball. It creates this very clear us versus them dynamic.
Yeah. Right. And then there's that whole overturning of Roe v. Wade. You know, the article suggests that that move really sparked anxieties within the LGBT community about potential rollback of other hard-won rights, like marriage equality.
Absolutely. It's created this ripple effect of concern.
Yeah, totally. And, you know, sometimes it's the smaller things that really speak volumes. The article mentions how Trump repeatedly referred to Anderson Cooper, the CNN anchor, as Ellison Cooper.
Right.
You know, it's...
Yeah, and that's something that some might just brush off as like, oh, it's a simple mistake. But I think, you know, for a lot of people in the LGBT community, it felt like a very deliberate and disrespectful act of misgendering.
Yeah, for sure.
And those actions can influence how people vote.
Right. Regardless of intent, it can rub people the wrong way.
Exactly.
So it wasn't just words, though, right?
Yeah.
The article also dug into Trump's anti-transgender messaging during the campaign.
That's right, yeah. And he even went so far as to say, we will get transgender insanity the hell out of our schools.
Wow.
So pretty strong language.
Yeah, definitely.
And it wasn't just talk either.
They put their money where their mouth is.
Exactly. Trump's campaign dropped millions on anti-trans ads leading up to the election. And a lot of these ads played on fears about transgender athletes in women's sports and government funding for gender-affirming surgeries in prisons.
Wow, they were really hitting this hard.
They were, yeah.
It's like that famous scene in Jaws where the captain sees the shark and he's like, we're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
What about that prediction from JD Vance, Trump's running mate? He was saying that Trump could win the normal gay guy vote, the folks who just want to be left alone.
Yeah, that was definitely an interesting prediction. And based on the exit polls, it seems like it didn't quite pan out.
It did not.
It seems like the leave us alone sentiment didn't really resonate as strongly as Vance had hoped.
Perhaps being left alone now requires pushing back against policies that they perceive as harmful.
It's true, yeah. It begs the question of whether silence is still an option when your rights and freedoms are under scrutiny.
Right, and this really kind of gets to the heart of the article's point, which is this increasing politicization of LGBT issues, especially when it comes to transgender rights.
Exactly. It's become a wedge issue, and both sides of the political spectrum are using it to rally their bases.
It's like they're playing this high-stakes game of chess, and the LGBT community is caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And it really makes you wonder, what does this shift mean for the future of LGBT political engagement and advocacy?
Right.
Will this trend continue?
Right.
How will it reshape the political landscape moving forward?
These are all big questions we're thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we, get lost in all of that, I want to jump back to something else the article touched on. You know how sometimes you're reading something and a particular sentence just kind of leaps off the page at you?
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, this line about Trump's, seemingly contradictory stances on LGBT rights really got me thinking.
Okay.
On one hand, he's the first GOP presidential nominee to publicly promise to protect the LGBT community during his RNC speech. But on the other hand,
he also hinted at possibly appointing Supreme Court justices who would overturn that landmark 2015 ruling legalizing same-sex marriage.
It's confusing.
It is. It's kind of a head-scratcher.
Totally. How do you even begin to reconcile those two positions?
Well, I think it speaks to the complex nature of this issue.
Right.
On one side, you have this historical push towards greater acceptance and legal protection for the LGBT community. But then there's this pushback from folks who feel unsettled, threatened even, by those changes.
Looks like a cultural tug-of-war.
Exactly, and it seems like Trump was trying to appeal to both sides.
Right.
Maybe seeing some political advantage in that strategy.
Makes you wonder how much of it was genuine conviction versus calculated political maneuvering, you know?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's something that political analysts and historians will be debating for years to come.
Yeah, for sure.
Like a real-life episode of House of Cards, but with even higher stakes.
Right, exactly. Speaking of high stakes, I found it fascinating how the article contrasted this whole LGBT voting trend with Trump's success in attracting other groups, like young and Latino voters.
Yeah, it's a very interesting juxtaposition.
It seems he made some real inroads with those groups, despite his policies and rhetoric often being perceived as detrimental to their interests.
Right.
It's like that old saying, politics makes strange bedfellows, but how do you explain that?
I mean, it's multifaceted.
Right.
Voting decisions are very rarely based on a single issue, right?
Sure.
We have to consider the bigger picture. Economic anxieties, cultural concerns, even just a candidate's personality can play a role.
So it's not as straightforward as saying, like, this group votes this way because of this one issue.
Exactly. Human behavior, especially in politics, is very, very rarely that simple.
Right. So much more complex than that.
Yeah.
It sounds like we need to do a whole separate deep dive into these other demographic groups to really understand what's going on.
Yeah, we should.
But for now, let's bring it back to the LGBT vote and what we've learned from this particular deep dive.
All right.
It's been a fascinating exploration so far.
It has.
And I will be sure to watch my Alison Cooper jokes from now on.
Probably a good idea.
Okay, back to serious business. What are the key takeaways from this discussion?
Well, I think we've seen a significant shift in LGBT voting patterns with this really dramatic swing away from Trump in 2024. This suggests that the GOP's anti-trans agenda and anxieties over potential rollbacks on LGBT rights really played a role in mobilizing voters.
Right, and it seems that whole leave us alone approach didn't resonate like some people had predicted.
It really didn't.
Maybe staying silent just isn't an option when your rights are on the line.
It's true.
Exactly.
It raises some crucial questions about the future of LGBT political engagement and advocacy.
For sure.
Will this trend continue?
Yeah.
How will it shape the political landscape moving forward?
Big questions.
Big questions.
Definitely some points to ponder. But speaking of pondering, there was another nugget in this article that really caught my eye.
Oh.
The whole discussion about the Catholic vote.
Oh, yeah. The article mentions this election saw the largest Catholic voting gap in decades.
Yeah, in decades.
It's definitely a trend that warrants further exploration.
Right, like what drove that shift and what does it mean for the future of religious influence in politics?
Well, that sounds like a deep dive for another day, but it's certainly a fascinating topic.
Definitely. But for now, let's leave our listeners with one last thought to chew on.
All right, I'm all ears.
If the 2024 election taught us anything, it's that identity politics are more potent than ever. But it's not always clear-cut.
Sure.
You know, we've seen how complex and even contradictory these issues can be.
Yeah.
So how do we navigate this increasingly fragmented political landscape in a way that fosters understanding and progress rather than division and hostility?
That's a powerful question.
It is a question that I think we all need to wrestle with as we move forward.
Yeah, I agree.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this segment of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time for another insightful exploration of the issues shaping our world.
Thanks for having me. So, you mentioned the Catholic vote earlier and how that gap was the largest in decades.
Yeah.
It's something I think we should probably unpack a bit further.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it ties into this idea of these shifting political landscapes we've been talking about.
It's like when you think you finally solved the Rubik's Cube, and then someone comes and gives it another turn.
Right.
It's like, wait, what just happened?
Exactly. And with the Catholic vote, it's really important to remember that they're not this monolithic block.
Right. It's not all the same.
Right. Exactly. The article highlights the significant split along racial lines, with white Catholics leaning really heavily towards Trump, while Hispanic Catholics were way more divided.
It's just like a good reminder that you can't just lump people into these broad categories and assume you understand their motivations.
Exactly.
It's much more nuanced than that.
It is. It's way more nuanced. And that's what makes it so interesting, right? It's like we really have to avoid those oversimplifications if we want to understand the complexities of voting behavior.
Yeah, so Trump gained ground with some Catholic voters. It wasn't like a uniform shift across the board.
It wasn't, no, not at all.
What about the Jewish vote? Did they follow a similar pattern?
Not really. The article suggests that while there was some variation within the Jewish community, exit polls indicate that they overwhelmingly supported Harris.
Okay.
Which actually aligns with historical trends.
Right.
Jewish voters have pretty consistently leaned Democratic for decades now.
So it seems like the Jewish vote stayed pretty reliable for the Democrats this election.
Yeah, it seems that way.
What about other religious groups? Did the article offer any insights into their voting patterns?
Unfortunately, no. It really just focused on the Catholic and Jewish votes, so we don't have as much data on other religious groups.
Okay.
But it does touch on this broader trend of religious polarization in American politics,
Right.
which is a whole other can of worms.
Oh, I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
It's like religious identity is increasingly becoming this predictor of partisan affiliation.
Exactly. You got
Which
it.
raises some pretty important questions about the role of religion in public life.
It does. Yeah.
Are we becoming more divided along religious lines?
Right.
And if so, what are the implications for social cohesion, for political discourse?
All really important questions.
Yeah, some heavy stuff to think about.
Yeah, it's a lot.
But before we get too lost in the existential dread of it all,
Yeah, let's not do that.
let's come back to the specifics.
Yeah, let's ground ourselves in the data.
So to recap what we've learned about religious voting patterns,
Okay.
we have this significant Catholic voting gap with white Catholics favoring Trump, Hispanic Catholics showing more division. The Jewish vote stayed largely Democratic.
Yeah,
And overall, there's evidence of increasing religious polarization.
that's a great summary.
Right.
It really highlights that religious identity, while super important, is just one piece of the puzzle
Right.
when it comes to understanding voting behavior.
It's not the whole story.
Exactly. We have to look at the whole picture.
It reminds me of those optical illusion pictures where you see one thing at first glance,
Yeah.
but then there's a whole other image hidden within it.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's all about perspective.
It is.
Right. You have to kind of shift your focus to see the full picture.
Exactly. And speaking of shifting perspectives, the article also mentions something that I think warrants further discussion.
Oh, yeah?
It points out that both Trump and Harris, despite their very different approaches, seem to struggle to connect with working class voters.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading that.
Yeah,
Neither candidate really seemed to grasp or address the concerns of that demographic,
that's right.
like fully.
Yeah, and that's crucial to think about, especially because the article also highlights how both Trump and Harris lost ground among younger voters.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because, younger generations are typically seen as more progressive.
Right. You'd think they'd be more aligned with the Democrats' platform.
Right, exactly.
But clearly something's not connecting there.
Right.
Maybe younger voters are just feeling disillusioned with the entire political establishment,
Yeah.
regardless of party.
Or maybe they're just not seeing their specific concerns addressed
It's
because
possible.
their voices aren't being heard.
Yeah, and that brings us back to, avoiding oversimplifications.
Right.
We have to resist those easy answers
Right.
and be willing to sit with the messy complexities of reality.
It's not black and white.
It's not. It's very gray.
Right. We can't just assume we know what people are thinking or why they vote the way they do.
Exactly.
We have to be open to exploring those nuances.
We do. And, this actually reminds me of another thing the article touched on. The role of social media in shaping political perceptions.
Oh, yeah. That was a fascinating part of the article.
It was.
Talked about how both campaigns really leaned into social media, but with very different results.
It's amazing how social media has become this, dominant force in our political landscape.
It really has.
It's like a digital Wild West out there.
It is. And what really struck me is that Trump, even with all those platform bans and restrictions,
Right.
still managed to use it to his advantage.
It is pretty remarkable, isn't it?
It is.
It suggests that even with increased scrutiny and regulation, social media is still a very powerful tool for political communication and mobilization.
Right. It's like trying to put the genie back in the bottle
Exactly.
once it's already out.
Yeah, good luck with that.
But the article also cautions against overstating the influence of social media.
It does.
Right. Saying it's not the only factor, like it doesn't single-handedly determine election outcomes.
It's not a magic bullet.
Right.
It's more like a megaphone.
Yeah, amplifying those existing trends and biases.
Exactly.
And this brings us back to that need for critical thinking
It does.
and media literacy.
For sure.
We have to be discerning consumers of information, especially in the age of social media where things can spread so quickly.
Absolutely, especially with all that misinformation and manipulation running rampant.
It's like we're all playing this giant game of Among Us,
I like that analogy.
trying to figure out who's telling the truth.
Who's the imposter?
Right, exactly.
You're on a roll with these analogies today.